I'd just like to wrap up with looking back over some of the answers that you've given. I have to say I'm quite astonished. I think we all are from our expressions at just how passive you are, given the huge amount of power and financial muscle that you have. I mean, I've been writing down some of the things you've said. You know, we've written strongly worded statements. We've written multiple letters. You know, it's all a bit wet somehow. Could I ask, first of all, how you decide how much money you're going to give to FIFA? Perhaps I could start with you, Mr. Hilton Johnson.
That will just depend on the package of rights that is in front of us. With some of those rights, the quantification of them is reasonably straightforward. For example, the perimeter boards is a form of advertising. There is a reference point. Some of the other programs are a lot harder, and you have to take a judgment call. So there is more science in some parts of it, and more art in other parts of it. So that's how we would go about it.
Okay, so Ms Reynolds, Mr Platter comes along and says, I'd like X, and you say, that sounds very reasonable, or you say, that's a ludicrous amount, I'll give you less. You negotiate, do you?
It's the subject of a commercial negotiation, as you would expect, and that would take into account, as Julian says, the rights that you get as part of that relationship.
Okay, I don't think we actually know the figures yet. Maybe I could ask you, Ms Ritchie, how much money do you give every year?
The terms of that contract are commercially sensitive, and I'm not able to answer that question.
Okay. Will any of you answer that question? No, it's a secret.
Excuse me, I mean, we can take it that it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
You have information from FIFA about how much they receive from sponsors generally, yes.
Right. And the total is about 25% of the total funding. So I think what you've said.
Somewhere in the 20
that
to
region.
25%
Okay, that's it.
range.
Okay, Mr Franklin, we heard from Greg Dyke previously that he thought FIFA was simply awash with cash. I mean, there's so much cash that they were able to pay out, as far as we can tell, bribes without knowing exactly where the money had been, which bank accounts they'd been sitting in. And he said, you know, as I say, there was cash flowing. Has the thought ever crossed your mind, perhaps, that you're just giving FIFA far too much money?
The subject, you know, our contracts are subjected to very strenuous third-party negotiations. I lead those on the part of the company. We take a reference point for the cost of other marketing assets that we associate with other sponsorships. So it is, you know, the FIFA agreement is consistent with the way that we negotiate all of our commercial agreements.
And did you never say at any point, what are you going to spend this money on? Did you never ask that question?
Well, the nature of the commercial relationship is that they stage the FIFA World Cup, which costs billions of dollars to stage. And the other tournaments, they have 7 tournaments a year. They stage those, and they provide other marketing rights to us, and that's what we're paying for.
Ms Ritchie, were you never worried about where the money was being spent, given the long-standing allegations about FIFA?
Certainly at the time we renewed the contract and went through this negotiation, we were concerned about the allegations against FIFA. And we were also cognizant of the reform efforts that were being undertaken at that time. So we placed some confidence in the commitment to reform that had been expressed by FIFA at that time. And
what about Mr Blatter made you believe that you could trust his word, given his track record and what the experts in the field who knew him said about him?
It's less Mr. Blatter that we would have been thinking of, and more Mr. P.F.
But Mr. Blatter was the boss. In fact, you know, we heard from Greg Dyke just now that FIFA officials treated him as if he was the North Korean dictator. So you knew ultimately that it was Mr. Blatter whose hand was on the tiller, who controlled the bank accounts.
We understood there were independent reviews going on which would require additional action. What happened, as we found out this year, was none of that, or not enough of that additional action was taken. Okay,
Ms Reynolds, did you ever try to follow the cash? Did you ever try and say, okay, I've given you this, I want to see how my money is being spent, our corporate money is being spent?
So what we have needed to rely on is the financial reports produced by FIFA, the income statements, how they explain the money in and the money out. I think we're clear that that is not enough, which is why, as part of our calls for independent reform, we're also calling for greater transparency. Obviously, there is external auditing already, there is compliance with IFRS accounting standards, but we're clear that's not enough, and we would like to see that greater transparency.
I think what we all want to know is why it took you so long. I mean, Mr. Franklin's been involved for 20 years. Why is it taking you so long to cut up rough with FIFA? And I have to say, from your answers today, your idea of rough and our idea of rough is very different. You must have been very nice kids in the playground at school. Mr. Franklin, why did it take you so long to get tough with FIFA? Oh, toughish with FIFA?
As I had mentioned in an earlier response, we receive information largely at the same time as the general public. It's not our commercial associations. We talk with the marketing teams, the people who are staging the tournaments.
You had no inside information of any kind until you read about it in the papers. You thought Sepp Blatter was a wholesome, upstanding kind of guy.
I can tell you, as the company's primary steward of our relationship with FIFA, that I was not aware of any illegal activity until the action of the U.S. government in May.
Is it possible, Mr. Hilton Johnson, that you don't realise how much power you've got? Because I think of you as very powerful. You've got huge amounts of cash. You don't seem to be at all worried about anybody stepping into your shoes. So you're very secure in your relationship as sponsors. All four of you have confirmed that. Mr. Blatter's empire would have collapsed without you. You had him by the short and curlies. You could really have made life very difficult for him, and at no point do you seem to have tried to cut up rough with him. Until you wrote him a series of strongly worded statements.
I think we have been very clear with FIFA that what is happening is unacceptable.
Yeah,
as I explained previously,
said
there was a series of events which have unfolded in a way that, to my knowledge, is unprecedented. Of course, there are learnings for us in all of this, in our dealings with sponsorships more widely. It is difficult for us to assess exactly how much influence we have with FIFA. We have to assume it is significant, and that is why once the events that have come to light, once we have the picture that we have been very firm with FIFA in our position and what needs to change.
I think the impression you've left, certainly with me and I think other members of the committee, is just how passive you have been throughout the process. I mean, I was frankly astonished when my colleague here questioned you about Qatar and the slave conditions in Qatar. Not one of you had hopped on a plane to go off and investigate what those conditions were like. And he really had to force you to agree to send somebody to look. I mean, it seems to be corporate behaviour at its most distant and rather cruel.
We have made our position very clear to FIFA. As I've said, there are learnings for this as we look back. It's an extraordinary chain of events, and we have to fix things moving forward with FIFA, and we will look very closely at our other sponsorships as well.
As a human being, Mr. Reynolds, though, when you read about the conditions in Qatar in the newspapers, my instinct would have been utter horror. And if I had your amount of power and money, I would really have done something about it straight away. The first thing I'd have done is to make sure that somebody was on the ground checking out what those conditions were like. And I was astonished that you didn't do that, none of you.
Of course, we were concerned to read those reports as well. The course of action we took was to raise those concerns with FIFA and seek assurances.
Strongly worded statements again.
To ask them actually what the situation on the ground was, what they were doing, what their engagement with the Supreme Committee in Qatar had been, and what reassurances they had received. I accept that more needs to be done, and we need to continue to push the case for proper standards to be applied. As
corporate sponsors, Ms. Ritchie, you must feel terribly ashamed when you read Playfair Qatar's figure, and they estimate that 62 workers will have died for each game that's played at the World Cup there. So when you turn on your telly and you see your corporate logo up, and you know those are the figures, that must fill you with shame.
Certainly the conditions in Qatar, as reported, and we rely on the reports from Amnesty International, among others.
Though you don't have to.
Are shocking and horrifying. and we consider them utterly unacceptable.
And you never thought of saying, these deaths have to stop, or my cash is coming out, and you've got 4 weeks to sort it out, and if there's one more death, our sponsorship goes. You never thought of saying that?
We have made our position very clear to FIFA.
They don't exactly seem to be trembling, I have to say.